Hey guys, here is lesson 2, river play. Here are some of the topics covered today. Firstly, we're going to discuss how to understanding how different rivers affect each player's ranges. Blockers, river play as the preflop raiser as well as the preflop caller. We'll also touch on the exploitative versus the GTO approach once again, which is kind of similar to what we did in the first lesson. So let's recall what we learned earlier. On the turn, pairing cards are good for the caller. Straight cards are good for the caller. Flush cards are more or less neutral. And high cards tend to be good for the aggressor. So, what do people usually call the turn with? They usually call the turn with some top pairs, some middle pairs, some strong draws. Strong draws meaning 8 outs or more. So this refers to an open-ended straight draw or a flush draw. What do people usually fold the turn with? Some middle pairs, bottom pair, and their weaker draws such as the gut shot straight draws. So from the preflop raiser's point of view, what is he usually barreling the turn with? So people usually just barrel the turn with most of their draws, some overcuts, especially on the drier boards, and occasionally they might do it with bottom pair or middle pair. Okay, so this brings us to the next topic. What rivers are good for the guy with the initiative, and what rivers are good for the caller? Okay, so let's look at it from the preflop raiser's point of view. What rivers are poor for bluffing? So, in general, when the top card pairs, it's really bad to bluff because your opponent is just going to have top pair way too often. When someone calls twice, he's going to have all the top pair combinations, or at least most of them. When the middle card pairs, it also favors the caller slightly. But in this case, it's not as bad as bluffing the turn, especially because a lot of players fold many of their middle pair hands on the turn, so when it pairs, it's not as bad as it would be on a turn, whereby your opponent would probably call the flop with every single middle pair, but on the river he will fold some of his weaker top middle pairs on the turn. What are good rivers for bluffing? From the PFR's point of view, when the gut shot straight draw completes, I think it's a really good spot to bluff, because your opponent as the caller is not going to call two streets with a gut shot, whereas as the raiser, you are probably going to be double barreling most of your gut shots. Because of this asymmetry in both of your ranges, you find that you have many more nutted combos when the gut shot straight draw gets there, and you can consider putting in an overbet just to put a lot of pressure on your opponent. You can do it both with the actual straight, or you can do it with some busted draws. High cuts. I think in general the caller is going to be even less likely to call the flop and the turn with two overcuts. This makes barreling the high cuts on the river pretty good. Of course, a lot of players tend to overdo it, so be wary about your opponent's tendencies and your own image as well. So what are cards which are more neutral for bluffing on the river? I think when the bottom card pairs, most players don't really call twice with bottom pair, so I think this can be considered a neutral card to bluff at. flush cards. When the third flush card completes on the river, I don't think it really favors any one of the players. So you probably want to be bluffing when you have a flush blocker. So if let's say there were 2 spades on the flop, the river brings a third spade, I would be more inclined to bluff it if I had a spade in my hand. When the open-ended straight draw completes, I think both players have it a similar proportion of the time. Of course, this kind of depends on how often the villain raises the flop or the turn with an open-ended straight draw. Okay, so let's discuss our first example here. Under the gun opens, the big blind calls. Under the gun barrels twice on a 10-9-5 deuce board. And we want to analyze how different rivers affect the equity of both players here. Assumptions. I'm going to be assuming that the under the gun player is barreling all his flush draws and most straight draws on the turn. So I'm giving him a range of 9s plus 5s, which is like sets and better, and overpairs as well. Ace 10, Ace 4, Ace 3, some gut shots, some top pairs, some flush draws. Pretty good mix of hands. And my assumptions for the big blind is that he is calling all top pairs. He's calling some 9x on the turn. I assume he folds 9-8 and 9-7. I assume he calls with 10-9 or better. Jack-9 or better. I also assume he would call with all open-ended straight draws and all flush draws. But in reality, he might be raising the flop or the turn with some of them. So yeah, this is the big blind's range. Some 9x, some 10x, some draws, some straight draws. Okay, so we get this on the turn. 57% equity for the pre-flop raiser. 43% equity for the pre-flop caller. So let's analyze a bunch of different river cards and see how the equities on the river tend to change. Okay, so on the ace of spade, which is a blank ace, the equity is about 57. So no real change there. It doesn't really favor a particular player by a lot. It's really low on an 8 because yeah, by the way, the equity here represents the pre-flop raiser's equity and not the pre-flop caller's equity. So on an 8, I think it just favors the pre-flop caller a lot more. He has 10-8. I didn't give him 8-8 in his range, but I don't think I included 9-8 inside. Yeah, but Queen Jack, I think the pre-flop caller has way more combos of, maybe a similar number of combos of Queen Jack as the pre-flop raiser. The pre-flop caller has a similar number of combos, but a higher proportion due to his narrower range for calling the turn. The 10 and the 9 of spade, which are both blank cards, favor the caller more. So you can see 57% equity drops by 7%. I guess we should look at the next slide because yeah, it might be a bit clearer here. Ace of spade, king of spade, kind of neutral. Ace of hearts, king of hearts, kind of neutral, although the equity did drop by about 1+%. The queen and the jack, despite whether the flush completes or not, tend to favor the pre-flop raiser more. This is because when the queen or the jack completes, the gut shot gets there. So when the queen completes, now king jack has a straight. When the jack completes, king queen has a straight. So the full 16 combos of straights really change the equity significantly. So yes, even though when the queen completes, the big blind will have queen jack top pair, but he cannot have a straight based on my assumptions. So it increases by the most on a jack. So a jack is really nice to overbet. Preflop caller has a huge advantage on a 10 or 9, so we should slow down as the preflop raiser. 8, as mentioned earlier, queen jack gets there. 7 and a 5 of spade kind of blank cards, so not too important. A 7 to 7 6 5 4 of hearts kind of neutral as well. So if I had like a heart blocker, I'll be more inclined to bluff. Yeah, so that's a pretty good example of how different rivers tend to affect our equities. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic, blockers. So what we'll find is that not all hands are equal, and blockers will actually affect our relative hand strength and our EV of bluff catching or bluffing. When we are bluffing and we want to think about blockers, it's important that firstly, we block our opponent's calling range, and secondly, we do not block our opponent's folding range. So these two factors added together ensures that we generate more full equity when we are bluffing. Bluff 3-barreling. It is better to bluff with low card busted draws. So what you'll find is that people tend to play more high cards than low cards pre-flop unless they are doing something really wrong. So when we pick low card busted draws to bluff with, we are going to be blocking fewer busted draws from our opponent's range. And this ensures that we maximize our full equity and the EV of bluffing. When we are in position, we usually check back ace-high draws or pairs which are double-barreled. So the out-of-position player sometimes check calls twice with draws. And I think that when you have some showdown value as the in-position player, it doesn't make any sense to bet the river with it. You might as well pick a weaker hand to bluff with, if let's say you can win 5 to 10% of the time on the river. Since given the fact that we can probably only bluff a limited amount of the time against decent opponents, because if we always bluff the river with all our bottom pairs, ace highs, middle pairs, our opponent will just keep bluff catching really light. This brings us to example 2. So we get the same scenario, the same board texture, and the 4 gets there on the river, 4 of diamonds. Under the gun double barrels and he is thinking of barreling the river. Let's assume that the big blind's call down range is Jack 10 plus. So that's basically top pair with a decent kicker. I assume that the big blind would fold Jack 10-8 on the river. And I assume that the big blind would fold 9x, 10-8 suited, Queen Jack, 8-7 suited, and 2 hearts. So this is basically all the busted draws, as well as some made hands. So our full equity here is 57%. So why 53 and 51? What's the disparity? Basically, when I was doing the calculations, sometimes I got 51 and sometimes I got 53 when I was calculating it on Equilab. So there might be some slight errors in the calculations, but it's not that important. What's important is the actual learning value behind the concepts taught here. Okay, so let's just take a look at how our full equity actually changes with different blockers. Okay, so we want to be opening Equilab here. You just click on, you just insert the board texture, right? The river card, the turn card, the flop cards. Insert the hand you actually have. Insert his range for folding. Insert this range for calling. So I'll just do it such that I put all 3 ranges here. Yeah, so I inserted the folding range of 53 combos, the calling range of 40 combos. Yeah, so I put it on the first line, the second line, calling range and folding range. On the third line, just enter the hand you want to test. So if let's say we were considering bluffing with Queen Jack of spades, yeah, so I'll just put it in and then test out my new full equity. So earlier on we had like 40 calling hands and 51 calling hands, right? So over here, based on my findings, we get like 45 calling hands and 35 folding hands. So our total full equity here is 56.25%. With ace king of hearts, it's 54.8%. With 6-7 of spades, it's 56.5%. So you'll find that you bluffing with a low non-busted hearts hand tends to generate the highest full equity here. Bluffing with a high flush blocker when the flush doesn't hit results in the lowest full equity here. So I highly recommend that you be more inclined to bluff with a low hand and avoid bluffing when you block the flush when the draw's missed. So even though a 2% difference might not seem like all that much, but when you're trying to maximize your profits and squeeze out every EV, it actually matters to some extent in the long run. Moving on, bluff-raising the river. So I think it's generally a good idea to use middle or bottom pair on the river to bluff raise if you think calling is minus EV. So if you cannot call with a weak mate hand, then if you had to balance your river raising range, I would very much prefer to do it with a low pair as compared to a busted flush draw or straight draw. Why is that the case? If you remember what I mentioned earlier about bluffing with blockers, it's good to block your opponent's value range. So if we had middle pair, we block top 2, bottom 2, and middle set from our opponent's range. Same applies for bottom pair. And we also do not block our opponent's busted draws when we actually have a pair. So different example. Under the gun opens, the button calls. The board is 10-8-5, deals 3. Under the gun fires 3 barrels, and he bets half pot on the river. The button is deciding what to raise on the river with. So we want to decide what hands are best for bluff raising here. Let's say that the button decides that he would only call King 10 and above on the river, and the under the gun player will bet fold the river with queens or worse, and he will bet call the river with kings or better. So what should the button bluff raise the river with? Of course, my assumptions here about under the gun may not necessarily be right, but I just want to illustrate the concepts here. It doesn't necessarily indicate that certain hands are better, but just get a rough idea about what hands tend to be better for bluffing with. So I'm going to prove to you that bluffing with a pair is much better. Okay, so let's say we have Queen 10 of diamonds. So the lower the score here, the worse it is for bluffing. The higher the score here, the better it is for bluffing. Okay, so this score here is basically the difference between how many folding combos we block and how many calling combos we block. So when we have Queen 10, we block queens, which is a main hand which I assume would bet fold, although that might not be the case. So for people who would bet call queens, there will be one less folding combo. Not one less folding combo, but 3 less folding combos and 3 more calling combos. 3 less folding combos, 3 more calling combos, yeah. But based on my assumptions, Queen 10 isn't good. We block queens, 3 combos of queens which will bet fold. Queen Jack is a busted draw. Ace 10 is also a main hand which would bet fold. That's a top pair hand. We block pocket 10s, which is top set. That hand would definitely not fold to a river raise. What about ace 8 of clubs? With ace 8 of clubs, we have middle pair top kicker. We don't block any straight or flush draws, which is good. We block 3 calling combos, pocket 8s and 10-8 suited, which are sets and 2 pairs, which will definitely not fold to a raise. Jack 9 suited, Jack 9 of spades. With the Jack 9 of spades, we block 2 folding combos, 1 combo of Jack 9 and 1 combo of 9-7 suited. We do not block any calling combos, so the blocking effects here work against us, so it's not good to bluff with a straight draw. 5-4 of hearts, that's the bottom pair. On the 10-8-5 board, we block 0 folding combos, we block 3 calling combos, which is also good, like ace 8. So what's the conclusion here? It's better to bluff raise with weak pairs instead of busted draws, especially if you're going to fold anyway. The showdown value should be insufficient to call down, and using the blockers make it such that you generate much more fold equity when you bluff raise. Blockers, bluff catching. So you want to be blocking your opponent's value range. When we are bluff catching, we do not want to be blocking our opponent's bluffing range. So this ensures that when we are bluff catching, we have higher equity on the river, and this maximizes the EV of calling here, which takes precedence here. So is blocking value hands or blocking bluff hands, not blocking bluff hands, more important? So I would argue that blocking value hands is more important. This is because people's value range tends to be constant. So someone would always value bet like an overpair on the river, or maybe a set or 2 pair. But the hands which people tend to bluff with may really depend on the player's preference. Of course, an optimal player will be bluffing with a good mix of hands, but certain players like to bluff with straight draws, some players like to bluff with high cards, some players like to bluff with flush draws, busted flush draws. On the flip side, we notice that people tend to have way more bluff combos as compared to value combos. So I think it's important, it could be more important to unblock your opponent's bluff combos if you know your opponent's strategy. A classic example would be on a monotone board, and when the opponent fires thrice and you have the nut flush blocker, is that good or bad? So we block flush draws and we block flushes, the nut flush draw and the nut flush. So in this case, I think people tend to over bluff with the nut flush blocker, so having the blocker here is actually not good. But I think in most other circumstances, blocking the value range makes it a lot better. Example 4, Bluff-catching the river. So we have the same situation, same board here. Just now the button wanted to think about hands which he wants to raise the river with. Now he's thinking of what he should be calling with. So let's compare a bunch of different hands and see how they perform. Let's assume under the gun 3 barrels queens plus for value, and that given the under the gun player's value range, a 10 is essentially the same as a 9, right? Because it's a pure bluff catcher. Although the blocking effects are different, but like essentially we always lose to our opponent's value range, and we always win his bluffs. Okay, so with the ace of heart, 10 of spade, we block 6 value combos, ace 4 of hearts, which is like the straight which got there, ace ace and 10-10. Yeah, so 3 combos of aces, which is an overpair, 2 combos of a set of 10s. We also block 6 bluff combos, which is ace hex of hearts, which is a busted flush draw. King 10. With King 10, we block kings and 10s. That's 5 value combos. We do not block 0 bluff combos. We do not block any bluff combos. So King 10 in this case is probably better than Ace 10. because ace 10 we block a lot of bastard flush draws. Ace 5 of hearts, we block 6 value and 6 bluff combos. So I guess ace 10 is probably better than ace 5, but they're kind of similar when we look at it from the perspective of blockers. If our assumptions were true, then actually both hands would have the exact same amount of equity on the river. 10-9 of diamonds, we block 2 value combos, pocket set of 10s. We block 2 bluff combos, 9-7 and Jack 9 suited. 7-8 of diamonds, we block 2 value combos, we block 2 bluff combos. Pocket 9s without the heart, we block 0 value combos, we block 4 bluff combos of bastard straight draws. Pocket 9s with a heart, we block 0 value combos, and we block 7 bluff combos. So 9x of hearts, yeah, that's a bastard flush draw, and the 4 combos of bastard straight draws. So what are some key takeaways from some of the analysis done here? Firstly, even though pocket 9s has a higher absolute hand strength as compared to 8x, but 8x here is actually stronger than pocket 9s from a relative hand strength point of view. Pocket 9s blocks many straight draws, whereas 8x blocks middle set and 10-8, which is top 2. Having a big heart sucks, especially having the ace of heart, because we are going to be blocking way too many bastard flush draws from our opponent's range. Finally, we have the exploitative versus GTO approach once again. So the exploitative approach is superior when our opponent's range is clearly defined. So the best example of this is when the opponent check calls the flop, the turn goes check check, and the opponent leads the river. I think that the player, the caller, is almost guaranteed to bluff every single hand without showdown value on the river in this case, after the initial raiser shows weakness on the turn. So I think in this case, the opponent's range is much more clearly defined. On the other hand, I think the GTO approach is more appropriate when the opponent's barreling frequencies are uncertain. So for example, when the opponent bets the flop, the turn, and the river, he would actually have to give up some of his bluffs on each street. So let's talk about this again. 10-9-5 with 2 hearts, with the deuce on the turn and the 3 on the river. Under the gun bets the flop, he checks the turn, and the big blind leads the river. As the under the gun player, we revert a pair, a low pair. So a lot of players will fold here, but let me explain why this is a very clear call. So the exploitative approach is very suitable here. The big blind is almost guaranteed to bluff all his bastard straight draws and all his bastard flush draws. Under the gun is often c-bet bluffing, and he's weak after checking the turn. He's usually giving up, and the big blind is going to bluff almost always with his air. So ranges here are very clearly defined. So we can do a simple pot odds versus pot equity analysis and decide whether we want to call or not. So the pot odds here against the half pot bet is 25%. When I include all straight draws and all flush draws and all top pairs, I think I've been pretty generous. I included all top pairs. I guess I didn't. It seems like, did I include 10-8? I think I did include 10-8 suited. Yeah, so even if the opponent, the big blind, starts to value bet ace 9, king 9, queen 9 sometimes, I still think it's a very clear snap call. We have 63.8% equity versus 25% pot odds, so very, very clear cut call. And the thing is that I didn't even include ace x of hearts, which some weaker players might bluff with. So if someone bluffs the ace x of hearts, then our equity with 3 pair goes up dramatically to maybe 66%. I'm not sure, I didn't do the calculations, but a few percent higher, I would say. So this situation is slightly different now. The small blind opens and the big blind calls. So the small blind fires twice and he pots the river. The board is ace jack 5 with 2 hearts, 9 of diamond turn, 3 of spade river. So the GTO approach is suitable here. I think it's difficult to know your opponent's exact bluffing frequencies if he is reasonably balanced. So I think you just have to take a guess about whether he's bluffing more or less than usual, and then you just adjust your calling range upwards or downwards based on how much your opponent is deviating from optimality. So we want to ask ourselves, is he overly aggressive or under aggressive? And then we just call more or call less accordingly. Let's say our opponent is overly aggressive here. 1 minus alpha here against a pot size bet is 50% of bluff catches. So on the river, we start with 136 combos of hands. I've only included bluff catches. Any hand without showdown value, I removed it from this range here. So some 9x, some 10x, some ace high draws, some pairs. Oh no, the board is ace jack x, so no ace high draws. Top pairs, middle pairs, bottom pairs here, just mostly like that. So we need to defend half of 136, which is 68 combos. If I selected all hands ace 4 and above without the heart, that amounts to 66 combos. So if your opponent is really aggressive and you decide to defend all top pair hands, that seems kind of reasonable as an adjustment. So if you defended all top pairs, you probably will be defending about 80 combos plus. 80 combos is about 60% of your bluff catching range, which is a bit on the wider side but could work well as an exploit against certain opponents. Okay, so this brings us to the end of lesson 2, river play. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to drop me an email. And of course, once again, do your homework. Check the answers. It's not a very difficult piece of homework. Shouldn't take too long. Maybe 15 to 20 minutes should be more than enough. So yeah, that's about it. In the next lesson, I'm going to be covering advanced concepts. Some cool stuff like cleansing our outs, dirtying our outs, stuff like that. Pretty interesting, I would say. So, have a nice day, see you next time, and bye.